So aloha, my name is Julie Mitchell. I am the Executive Director here at Ikahi Mediation Center. And we are one of the 5 nonprofit community mediation centers in the state. We were founded in 1983 as a program of the Island of Hawaii YMCA. And we became our own independent nonprofit in 2006. That's 15 years this year, which is exciting. Our mission is to empower people to come together, to talk and to listen, to explore options and to find their own best solutions. And to achieve this mission, we offer mediation, facilitation, and training like today to strengthen the ability of diverse individuals and groups, resolve interpersonal conflicts and community issues. Our Brown Bag Lunch series is held every third Thursday at 12 noon on Zoom. And you have to register on Eventbrite each time to receive the Zoom link. And we already have the rest of the year on Eventbrite. So if you just want to go in, you just have to register for them one at a time. At the end of our talk today, we're going to ask you to fill out a short online survey. It helps us with our grant funding for this free series. And I'll put the survey link in the chat and you can just click into it and then give us your thoughts. I'll also send out an email later with the slides and the video link, as well as a link to that survey. If you're not sure we have your email, for example, if you are coming on somebody else's Zoom account or whatnot, you can just put your email in the chat and then I can make sure to get that to you. So today we are very lucky to have my friend and colleague, Elizabeth Kent, with us. What's exciting about Elizabeth is that when I first met her, she was the director of the Center for Alternative Dispute Resolution, which is the judiciary department that oversees the 5 community mediation centers contract with the judiciary to provide services. But since then, she has done trainings for us, given talks like this one, and also for those of you who don't know, she's also an amazing artist, and she makes these beautiful kimono style jackets and quilts and all sorts of creative fabric art. Let's see, what else should I say about her? She is a private facilitator and mediator and trainer. She holds a JD and has helped people and institutions find solutions to sticky problems for over 30 years. She has practiced commercial law and worked in Hawaii state government, including the Department of Human Services, the University of Hawaii, and as I mentioned, the Judiciary Center for Alternative Dispute Resolution. So please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Kent. Silent round of applause on Zoom coming your way.
Thank you, Julie. It's so nice to see a lot of old friends. And speaking of seeing, thanks to those of you who have your cameras on. It'd be great if some of those of you who don't would turn them on as well. It really helps me as a presenter to be able to see you. So I'm part of the Accord group, which is an international hui put together by Peter Adler. And a while ago, I asked Accord members if they had signature moves that they wanted to share. A number of them chimed in. And Julie, now's a good time to go to the PowerPoint, if you would. So a number of them chimed in, and you will see that Nicola from New Zealand and Dick from California and I, we really, as we say, we had a moment and we had great discussions on it. And so their help is what helped me to come up with the idea that it would be nice to have a presentation on signature moves. So I have a few objectives for today. The first is that we take a look at ourselves and what we do and our own signature moves and techniques. I think that'll really help us if we can think about the moves and what we do. Then I want to think about why we do them. And I hope that we will share tools that work for us, and all of us are going to walk out of here with something new that we can try. I want to focus too on matching the tools and the techniques to the situations where they might be the most helpful. So if you're like me, you're probably a multitasker, and multitask away, go for it. But I want those of you, especially who are multitaskers, to be thinking that in about 8 minutes, I'm going to put you, or Julie's going to put you into small groups, and we're going to ask you to think about your own signature moves and those signature moves that you have seen other people do in conflict resolution. By the way, did you watch the Carol Burnett show? Does anybody know why she would do that, pull on the ear? Yeah, John Fink.
Yeah, it was a tribute to her grandmother.
It was exactly her way of saying, hi, Nanny, thinking of you. That was her signature move. Next slide, please, Julie. So a while ago, I read an article in the ABA journal that referred to an article in the Associated Press. It talked about Justice Sonia Sotomayor, and she often, this is her signature move, she often interrupts an attorney during oral argument, and she says, I'm sorry, even though they said the tone of her voice suggests that she isn't sorry. She did that 98 times 2 sessions ago, her signature move. Justice Neil Gorsuch, he has one too. He tells lawyers often that I need help understanding something, or he asks them to help him out. 2 sessions ago, he did that 25 times. But the article said that what he really means is that he isn't buying what the lawyer is selling. Do any of you remember the Olympics, not this past one, but I think the last one and the one before? There was this swimmer, and I'm a former swimmer, so I really watched the swimming. Well, before the start of the race, he would always spit into his competitor's lane, his signature move. So when does something that we do become a habit? When does it become second nature? For me, after reading that article, it became personal, because in the midst, as I thought about that, there was one week where I was mediating and facilitating 3 completely different kinds of cases. And as I thought back about what I was doing, I realized that I had said almost the exact same thing in those 3 cases. Very similar point. It wasn't planned, it just came out. So I tried to observe myself in different cases, and I found that I did the same thing often. Were they my signature moves? If they were my go-to moves as a mediator and a facilitator, were they appropriate to the situation, or was I making it more about me? Were they more like a tell in poker? So that's what I want us to think about. Are signature moves for us, or are they for the people that we work with? And apparently Leonardo DiCaprio is known, his signature move is making a toast. Next slide, please, Julie. So these are a few of my moves, and I'm going to talk about them. And Julie, if you could go to the next one. One of the most powerful tools that I've learned, or it feels very powerful to me, I learned it from Owen Tamamoto in a presentation that he gave on nonviolent communication. Lisa, you know about this one. It's about knowing the difference between facts or observations and judgments. So you can say, if we were in a room, the walls in here are white. That's a fact. This room is nice and light. That's a judgment. Often parties, I find, and I think humans in general, I believe, think that they're making an observation when it's a judgment. I've heard this a lot. She can't be trusted. He didn't enter into this process in good faith. Have you heard those in some of your work? The challenge, I think, is to help parties see when they are doing it, and to help them think about the difference between an observation and a judgment. So I use this tool a lot, and it's often successful when I use it, but certainly not always. Next, please, Julie. This is from the Difficult Conversations book by Bruce Patton, Douglas Stone, and Sheila Heen. And Dana, you and I have talked about these a lot. The one that I focus the most on when I'm mediating is talking about the truth conversation and helping parties to understand that there is no universal truth about some of the issues that they're arguing about. There can be many truths, like the observation judgment tool. I use this a lot. It's often successful, but sometimes the parties are turned off. And John Barkey, I want to thank you for loaning me this book many, many years ago. It's really important, and I highly recommend the book. There are also some other gone wrong elements in there that are definitely worth reading about. Next slide, please, Dana. Julie. So one of my other signature moves that I found in myself, I challenge parties to consider if what's bothering them is a universal truth. We all have implicit rules and they collide when we get into trouble. So for me, this is an example of a universal truth. This is just wrong. I think we can all agree that you should never leave a restroom like this, especially if there's more toilet paper that you could put in there. And Julie, on to the next one. This is a personal truth. What is the right way to load toilet paper onto the toilet paper holder? Dear Anne or Dear Abby said that the most letters that she ever received was the right way to put it on. I mean, it was something like over 12,000, if I'm remembering right. It might have even been more. It was so many thousands. But the reason that I go to it is that it's not so easy to get to personal truths. And it's really a challenge. And so this is what, when I'm getting to my signature move in one of my mediations, I challenge people. Do you let go of the small stuff? Or do you be angry that somebody is consistently a minute or two late to a meeting? What's the right way for you to act when good friends share issues? You know, when good friends have a problem, do you share it right at the time or do you wait? Are you tactful to people even when they aren't tactful to you? Those are all personal truths. And these are the kinds of issues that I raise with parties to move them away from the certainty that the way that they're seeing things is the right way, and the way that somebody else is seeing it is just plain wrong. Next slide, please, Julie. So this is the interactive part. What Julie's going to do is break you into small groups, and you'll have 12 minutes together. It'll be a little bit less than that, but right around 12 minutes. And what I would like you to do is introduce yourselves to each other, and then talk about signature moves that you have used or that you've seen other people use in conflict resolution, when they were used, whether or not they were successful. If you have time, think about why were they successful? What was it that the person did that really changed the way that people were thinking or changed the impasse? One slide back, please. Thank you. And if you can identify when you come back, please in your group, come up with one that's successful that you can share with the larger group when we come back together. You can put it into the chat, or I'll ask a few of you to share what you've seen. Does anybody have any questions before we break into small groups? Okay, Julie, take it away. So anybody have a signature move that you want to share? Maureen, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, we were talking about how we asked people how they feel, how the situation makes them feel, rather than what do you think, but how does it feel in your body? Maybe suggest a couple of emotions, see if they grab onto any, or just leave it very open in the beginning so that they can get a little more in touch with the feeling.
We have time for one more. Any hands? Let me just, Corey.
All right, so I had two people in my group, and some of the things they came up with were signature move of have an open mind, and think of having an open mind as the parachute that you're gonna sort of glide down from an airplane to the ground. And the more open that parachute is, the more likely it is to save your life. And so kind of putting you in that positive mindset. So I thought that was really awesome. There are a few more there are a bunch in the group. So
and I'm going to ask everybody can you start putting them in the chat? Because I think these are, I think, the jewels that you're coming for is what can I say in my next session that might change things? So if we could get a really robust chat going on, that would be wonderful. Julie, could we go back to share screen, please? So this is some of the small group wisdom that has been shared, and that's a foosball. Get it? These are tips. The money is a tip. And so if you can just get that chat going, do your multitasking, that would be great. On to the next slide, Julie. So I asked myself about my signature moves, why did I do them? And I realized they were based on instinct. So have you heard of Gavin de Becker? I bet you have. He was in the news a lot because he was Jeff Bezos's security advisor. And when all that stuff came out about the pictures and such, we were hearing a lot from Gavin de Becker. Well, way before that, I read his book. And this is what I learned from him. This book is such a good book, available at the Hawaii State Library. Easy read. And after I read this, I read every single thing that he wrote because it was so good. But this is what I learned from him. We trust our instincts, but what really lies behind our instincts is a series of observations that come from those instincts. And what we also know is that the mind plays a lot of tricks on us. And so that's what we want to be looking at. Are our instincts, when we want to share something, is it based on our observations? And so I realized that I needed to look a lot further beyond just my instincts, which are based on my intuition, my years of experience, and what feels right to me. Next slide, please, Julie. So I was thinking with Nicola and Dick about what is it and when is it that we feel that we need to use something different. And these were three of the things that we saw. In addition to feeling that the person is reluctant, one of the keys for me that makes my instincts kick in is when I'm seeing anxiety and when I'm seeing anger, actually. I think that often hesitation comes about because people are worried about the future. There's an uncertainty. They're not really ready to look at a different future. I think resistance comes about because maybe they're having a really bad reaction to the other person who's in the room. It might even be from you that they're having a bad reaction to. We learned so much about if one person says something, well, the other person automatically isn't going to do that. So I think that resistance can come from a lot of different places. Next slide, please, Julie. But the more that we realized and we talked about what it is, we realized that it was important to go very deep and go back to the basics. What are the underlying interests? And so in the conversations that Dick and Nicola and I had, these three things seem very similar to all of the resistance, reluctance, and hesitation that we saw. There's a fear that someone's going to try and take advantage of the situation. There's a fear about not knowing the process or important facts. Definitely a fear of humiliation, of losing face in front of other people. And people are uncomfortable because they might become overcome with emotions that they haven't had enough time to deal with. I mean, the anger of being in a divorce case, the anger of being left for your best friend, that's pretty hard to take. So the past is definitely for many, if not all of the people that we deal with, the past is lost. It can be about betrayal. It's not a good past, and that is scary. And then when they think about the future, that can provoke fear because there's so much uncertainties. Other causes that we identified: hopelessness. You don't know what you can do, and you really don't know what's being asked of you. So often with the parties that I work with, I sense that the powerlessness that they feel a lack of fairness. Often they feel that somebody is just trying to rub their nose in it, vindictiveness. Often people feel very dismissed. They feel unimportant, disregarded, and it's really hard to admit when you were wrong. Next slide, please, Julie. So we're not going to take 12 minutes. Instead, I'm going to ask you to be as concise as you can. And Julie, let's cut that down to about 6 minutes. And when you're in your group, I'd like you to talk about some of the underlying causes that you've seen as a conflict resolver or in conflict. I identified a lot of different ones, but if you can, please identify one that hasn't already been discussed and come and share it with the group when you return. I think it's going to be helpful for us to be aware of those as we think about what's the best signature move to apply in a certain time, and also to be more in touch with what the parties are going through that we're working with. So time for the breakouts. Any questions before we do that? Thank you, Julie. So this is the time for the small group wisdom. Anybody want to share something that came up? I'm looking for hands up.
I can share.
Lisa.
Okay, so our group discussed when there's you've got parties or teams, and there is each side is missing pieces of information, and that can cause a lot of frustration. And it could cause the level of frustration could depend on the context of the situation. If you're working in a kind of a business environment, you've got two teams, and the team's skill sets are such that maybe they just don't realize they're not kind of sharing information that's important for the other team to know. That can cause some frustration. So, the role of somebody functioning as a facilitator could be the bridge to help get the needed information for both teams to feel comfortable moving forward. When you have a contentious situation like a divorce or whatnot, the lack of information sharing could cause a lot of feelings of mistrust, distrust, withholding of information. People can really, it can really spin people up. So we were thinking about our signature move about trying to remain positive and having an open mind would help kind of facilitate, hopefully, the sharing of information between the parties and also with the mediator or the facilitator.
Okay. Dana, in our group, something that you've written about a lot came up, and that was grief as an underlying cause. And we realized that grief is present in many of the different types of cases that we deal with. So Julie, could we go back to screen share, please? And again, I encourage you to post in the chat so that others can share and hear. So one back, please, Julie. Thanks. So successful moves. Here are some of the moves that have worked in some cases to deal with fear, mistrust, and confusion. Asking people about their highest hopes versus their greatest concerns. Normalizing the reasons that we hesitate, that we're reluctant, that we resist and explain, that are common in your experience. Just today, I had a case, and somebody, I could tell they were very upset about what had happened, but I've seen it a lot of times before. And I just wanted I wanted to normalize it. I wanted them to know this is not that big of a thing. It's pretty common for me to see. And I think that took some of the pressure off. Asking them, under what circumstances would you be okay with this? Or following what Dana suggested, I was in the breakout that Dana was in. I know it feels impossible for you to imagine this right now, but if it could happen, would that be a positive thing in your life? So changing the way that you say something, accessing somebody's imagination, asking them, what do you think should happen rather than what do you want to happen? talking to them about what part of this is most difficult for you. And Terry, in our little breakout, our session just now, that's what you were talking about. Help me understand. That came up in the previous one too. I really want to understand why this is so hard and what part of it is the most challenging. Help me confirm what I think I heard you say, because this is my understanding and it might not be right. And so you're putting it on yourself if you heard it wrong. Asking them what could be done that would put them in a better or a different frame of mind. So those are some of the signature moves that people have used when they're dealing with fear and mistrust. And again, there's a lot of wisdom in this group. So I encourage you to use the chat. Next slide, please, Julie. So after all this work and thought, this is what I have come to realize for myself. I'm going to stick with the tools and techniques that are have been tried and are true for me. I want to use some of the ones that you've suggested and that other people have suggested to me, but this is what I'm going to do differently. I'm still going to stick with observations and judgments and those other two, but instead of just coming out with it and basing it on my intuition, I'm going to think about it from the party's point of view. I'm going to be sure that when I'm preaching to the choir, it's the right choir, as they'd say. I just want to make sure to use another cliche that we talk about so often in ADR. I want to fit the forum to the fuss. I want to fit the tool or the technique to the fuss so that I'm putting it in at the right time and making sure that it's about the parties and not about me. So when I feel, and my instinct is, this is the time to talk about, for instance, observations and judgments or the truth conversation, I'm really going to question to myself, is it really the time? And then if I can come up with specific observations that support my instinct or judgment that it is the right time, then I will use that tool. But I want to think before I act. Julie, last slide, please. So, and now we can stop share. This is the discussion and the mahalo and the time for everybody. We have some time to hear your thoughts and ideas. Anybody? Let me just check the next screen and ask who wants to share something. Diane, was that a hand?
Only intuitively was it a hand, Elizabeth.
I'd love to hear what you have to say, Diane. So nice
I
to see you.
actually would like to accord respect to Rich Masuda, who was in the group and who spoke about some things in support of what we were working on. And Rich, if you would be so kind to just amplify a little bit on our discussion on assumptions and your example, I really wish you would share that with the group. That was very useful.
Sure. I was, thanks, Diane. And actually, I was going to bring up something you said, but I was in a pretty contentious meeting of different stakeholders yesterday. And one of the things I saw go off the rails that was underlying was this mistrust. And it was largely arose out of assumptions that the parties are making about each other's intent. And what I reflected on afterwards was that they didn't even check to see if the assumptions are right. And if we would have just paused at that moment and said, what I'm getting is your intention in this is this. And if the other person could have just spoken to that, it would have been out on the table, or it would have been surfaced that it was the wrong assumption. And the whole rest of the meeting was kind of derailed by that. And it's a series of meetings. And now I'm worried that trust lingering there is going to affect the next meeting. And so we probably need to kind of start with that next time to not get stuck. And then the thing that Diane shared that was really cool was that sometimes people get so emotional that they box themselves into a corner. And whether you're like the official facilitator or just a participant, if you can help to build a bridge to get them out of that corner, like a face-saving move where they're allowed to take in what they heard and learned and apply it, and they get a redo kind of, and they're not just walled off in that corner. So technique, like Diane shared some techniques around that. That was real helpful. Thanks.
That's great.
There's a question in the chat, Elizabeth, that says, how do you handle a party in conflict who resists the mediation process and wants the judge to decide the case?
That's really good. I'll start on an answer, and we have so many longtime mediators in this group. I hope that you'll amplify it. I want to start off by asking them why. Help me understand why, because it's possible that there may be some really important reasons that aren't clearly apparent to me. But I need to do what Rich was just talking about and understand the assumptions there and understand what they're thinking and feeling before I do it. But please, I see so many longtime mediators. I'd love for you to jump in. John Barkey, are you still there?
I am still here, but I'm stuck right now on the intention that you were just talking about, and it reminded me of a line from Difficult Conversations that I wanted to share with the group. And the intention, they called it the intention invention, and it's kind of like the assumptions that when we're in conflict, and maybe the people who we're in front of when they're conflicts, the assumption is that when I'm working with you, my intention is pure and guileless, but your intention is to harm me. So that's that kind of flip around and trying to get people to see it from a different perspective. So I'll let someone else answer the question you posed.
Diane.
Are you asking me again, Elizabeth?
I am, because I thought I saw you. I thought I saw you wave your hand.
I might have, but I wasn't responding. So give me another piece. Give me something to fine tune it on that you want to hear.
I want to hear, what do you say to that beyond, after you've said, help me understand why you'd prefer the judge to hear my case instead of resolve it in mediation? What else would you say?
Okay, so of course, my whole focus is on exactly what they're saying. I don't focus on what I'm going to say. I know that's antithetical to many of us thinking well ahead or 2 or 3 questions going forward. But for me, the listening is crucial, because until I've heard everything they've said, I don't know what I'm going to ask next. So it's going to build on a piece that doesn't quite ring true to me or doesn't seem to make sense. And then it's going to be a very gentle. So you're thinking your best shot is to have the judge make the decision. And if that's so, and that's not the way that the decision goes down, where are you then? And that's, acknowledging and being very supportive of their choice instead of pitching something against their choice. So I leave a lot of space for them to come out of where they've been sitting. And I never put myself in the position of trying to suggest something else when this is the crux of it. This is why they want the judge to do it. So I've got to respect that, but I am going to very curiously answer things like, okay, I get that. What about this? And be very gentle.
And then I will go back, Elizabeth, if you were asking, I would do kind of what Diane was talking about, but I'd even be maybe even shorter with the question to them and say, so what do you think would happen if the case goes to the judge? I mean, my assumption is that they're going to believe they're going to win, but I want them to talk about that for a while, and then we could put that out on the table and decide where to go with it.
Robert, did you want to say something?
Yes, I don't think sometimes it's easier for them to accept the loss than it is to make a compromise. And what I was talking to folks about is sometimes they get a lot of bad advice from friends and family, and they cue on really bad, like, oh, I should get a grand sum of money because that's available because all my friends have said that. And it's really flimsy, and you don't know what the outcomes are, but you can be pretty reasonable that they're not going to get what they're asking for, but they'd rather have the judge tell them no than settle for anything less, because if you lost, well, that's because it's a bad judge. If they settled, then, well, I compromised, and I somehow compromised my value. And wow, it's just they're in a tough position. I like what was said about not making an assumption and trying to work with them gently and to try to turn that around. I think it's a really good approach, and so yeah, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's 1 o'clock, and I would love to stay on this conversation. I know, Porny, you had suggested that it would be great to have Dana answer it, and I would love to do that if it's okay with Julie, but I think we should honor that it ends at 1. And let me turn it over to Julie and just respond to Corey. The question about social media, oh my gosh, it has changed it so much. I think that should be some future lunchtime topic. So thank you all very much. You've been a great group. Julie.
I appreciate everyone coming today. Please do take a few minutes to fill out our online survey. It helps with our grant funding for the series, which is free. The survey link is in the chat, so just click on that and start working on it. Check your emails in the next week or so for the slides and the video link. Hope to see you next month. And if folks do want to stay on for a little bit longer, I'm happy to keep the Zoom room open if that would be helpful. And maybe just another Zoom room round of applause from our wonderful
all of you.
presenter, Elizabeth, and for all of you
Yeah.
for doing the work you do in conflict resolution, or just hanging out with us today and wanting to know more about it. So if you need to go, go. If you'd like to stay, and have a great weekend.
Dana, will you share?
Dana, yes, please.
You're on mute, Dana. Dana, you need to unmute.
Dana, you still mute. We couldn't hear you. Dana, please unmute.
Thank you. Well, I just gave my great answer. No, it's great to see all of you. Well, I think what matters most is that I'm not trying to talk somebody into staying in mediation. On the other hand, I think they do need to reflect on the choice that they're making. And so one of the things that I feel strongly about, and I typically say this at the outset of mediation, that one of my jobs here is to help people keep in the conversation until they can really realize what's possible in terms of the negotiation. And so if a person is making this statement before we've completed sort of this exploration of what can be negotiated, then I would ask them, whether it would be a good idea for them to at least figure out what is possible here, so that they will have a basis for comparing whether that's better for them than going forward. Of course, that depends a lot on their answer. Sometimes they're frustrated, the other person's in bad faith, and whatever they say. All of those reasons are ones that I think can be responded to in the way that I just described. And then there might be a different response, as we discussed earlier. But I want to help them figure out what can happen. And if we stop before that, I worked as a Ninth Circuit mediator for 4 years, and talk about how many times I'd seen parties in mediation who said to me, wait a minute, we offered that at the last, before the trial. And I want to bring that up because sometimes people walk away from a mediation or mediators end the process saying it's hopeless, when in fact, there's a lot more that can happen. And so encourage them to find out what that might be.
How about anybody else? Other thoughts?
So I'll just frame my social media question a little bit. So I work in software, and one of the things I'm really interested in is, as an industry, I feel like we've created all these toxic mechanisms in social media, which are driving people apart. And so one of the things I'm thinking about is how can we build mechanisms into software, in the scalable way to bring people back together? And like, what are the differences between those mechanisms? So I'm curious to hear from all the people who are mediators. How has social media changed your experience from what you're seeing as people deal with conflict resolution? So. That's probably a big topic, and that could probably be a topic on its own, like you said.
I think one thing with social media, it doesn't punish people for sufficiently for bad behavior. I'm sorry to say that, but if you're rude to people in a crowd or even in a thing, I mean, the reaction you get is quite, and it's called social media, but it's very unsocial in the way it deals with people, because the more rude and the more likes and stuff like that you may be able to obtain by being, so the reward system is so skewed. And I would say you'd have to somehow correct the reward system that bad behavior is not tolerated.
For me, there's just a whole nother forum that I have to deal with. And that there's a whole nother party that's outside of the group that I'm working with. If people are doing a lot of posting on social media, and it's something that's so hard to have control over. I mean, it can just get out of control, and then it can, we used to play this game. I went to Anaheim Elementary, and we would play this game where one kid would have the ball and everybody else would jump on them. It wasn't fun if you had the ball, but if you were doing the jumping on top of them, it was pretty fun. And that's how social media feels sometimes. It's just such a, it can be positive, because you get all these likes, but also when I'm mediating a case and all of a sudden there's stuff going on in social media, it just feels like I'm back in the 3rd grade jumping on the kid with the ball.
So do you tell people, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just wondering what other people's reactions were.
I can just share one thing I've started doing, which is I will respond positively to things. So in my neighborhood, there's many controversies and homeowners associations in Puna, in Hawaii Island. So I will say, thank you for posting the minutes. Thank you for your transparency. I appreciate your service, or whatever. I just started putting some positivity into it, because there's so many negative comments. I'll just try not even to look at those because it's just too much, and just try to add a little bit of just be a little more cordial than others are. But I've really limited my exposure because I find it very disturbing, a lot of it. Yeah. Even on groups that are like-minded, I've seen on feminist groups, LGBTQ groups, I've seen the same kind of behavior happening. And I find it not to my liking.
mean, one good thing, I mean, two good things. One is I know what people are thinking, and I appreciate that, you know, because otherwise they're still thinking it, but I don't know it. So it's good to know it. And the other good thing is it's really good for getting the word out, you know, because sometimes you can't reach all the people you want to reach. And so those are two positive things I thought about.
Yeah, we should have a whole discussion about social media. We could speak for longer than an hour, I'm sure. Well, it seems like we may have reached the end of our discussion today. Elizabeth, do you have anything else you want to close out with?
I don't, unless anybody else has anything.
Okay,
I'll
well,
say
I
thanks
know-
for all the tips and techniques. And Julie, I would like to say one other thing. Sorry. Ikahi, I know a number of you on here. And so I know that you're also on Oahu, where I am, and in California. And I just want to put in a plug for ikahi. It is such a great mediation center. And Julie is a jewel of an executive director. So keep looking at ikahi. If you feel like making a charitable donation, that please consider ikahi. Julie probably wouldn't say that, but they really do great work in the community, and they've expanded the community. So I want to thank Julie for putting this together and for all the good work that ikahi does.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'll put the link to our website in the chat if you want to check it out a little more. Have a great day, everyone.
Nice to see you all. Aloha.